Welcome to Life on Purpose, where we talk all things health, wellness, and living your life on your terms. I'm your host, Brandy Eilert. All right, welcome back to the Life on Purpose podcast, where today my guest is Jonathan DePotter, founder and CEO of Behold Retreats, a wellness service that facilitates journeys of self-discovery and transformation supported by the scientifically proven benefits of plant medicine therapy, which is a very interesting topic. So welcome to the show, Jonathan. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Brandy. It's a real pleasure. And looking forward to exploring this topic together.
Right. So, like I said, I have so many questions. We were kind of touching base before we started recording. This is an area that is obviously developing, the use of plant therapy for kind of mind, body healing, spiritual healing, trauma healing, all of that. However, it's not really at the forefront right now because, we kind of have like legal issues and all that stuff. So we're going to dive into that. But I would really like to start kind of from the beginning about your story. How did you get here? Because this is not where you started, right?
Yes, happy to share. And look, it's to be honest, it's as far away from what I was doing and where I ever envisaged myself as could possibly be imagined. So I grew up with very liberal hippie parents that were very open-minded, quite spiritual. And so, of course, as is often the case, I branched entirely in the opposite direction. I was blessed to grow up in Hawaii, which is, a pretty progressive and liberal environment, and dare I say, substance rich. And I really saw a lot of negativity and dark energy around me growing up in that environment. And so, what I kind of felt, what I was taught in school and what I observed around me all kind of aligned in the sense that like, hey, these are, substances on the whole are bad. There's nothing good here and you should keep them out of your life. And so, that's really how I led the vast bulk of my teenage years and indeed into my adulthood. So I guess for me personally, my progress was into the corporate world and spent most of my career there, relatively successfully. After about 15 years of working, I was again blessed to find myself leading a team of about 120 people in strategy and management consulting in Hong Kong. So pretty intensive work, 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. quite regularly, and just chasing the next client, chasing the next deal, trying to manage more things, more teams, more projects, all of those sorts of complexities that are kind of part and parcel of the corporate world and of management consulting. And
so
I guess
very
for me,
high stress, high energy, kind of just constant go, go, go.
Constant go, go, go. And there's the sales target is always bigger, and the promotion is always the next level, and there's just no end to that. So I guess I just kind of, to be honest, hit a bit of a wall in the sense that I recognized at some point, I remember looking myself in the mirror and thinking, is this it? I wasn't, like I said, I was an atheist at the time. I wasn't spiritual at all. But I recognized that the next promotion, the next client, the next deal wasn't going to bring me any sort of incremental satisfaction or improvement to quality of life. Mm-hmm. And so I remember in that moment looking myself in the mirror and saying, there's got to be something else. I don't know what it is. I don't know where it's going to come from, but I'm going to take a year off and I'm going to create a vacuum for myself and go and travel and explore the world and see what the universe has to share with me.
So you felt like at that moment, kind of at this burnout moment, that there was something more. You couldn't put your finger on it, but you knew that there was something missing. And all of these things that you were chasing, the bigger deal, more money, more prestige, whatever it may be, wasn't fulfilling. So that link wasn't being, that emptiness or that hole wasn't being filled with what you were doing.
Exactly. And it's not to say that anything was inherently wrong. I enjoyed that work. I was pretty energized by it. I wasn't, you used the word burnout. I was working pretty hard, but I didn't feel burned out. I really enjoyed the intellectual challenge of it and, growing a team and seeing people succeed and doing great things for our clients. All of those things were coming together in a way that, by any modern standard, by any definition of, what good looks like, I suppose I had that. But, to your point,
you ticked all those boxes, but there was still
something missing.
Something else.
There was something missing, and I could not and would not have guessed that if you had told me at the time that spirituality was that thing, I would have rolled my eyes and laughed.
This is so funny. This is such a story that I've been hearing so much lately. Kind of that missing link for people is that spiritual link that, isn't there as much as maybe in decades past. So where did this lead you? You took this year off. Did you have a plan? What was the plan taking this time?
So the initial plan was Patagonia. So I spent about 6 weeks down in the south in Argentina and Chile, down in the mountains there. Such beautiful country, and hiking. And over the course of 3 weeks, my resting heart rate dropped from 83 to 53, all else being equal.
Your resting heart rate on a normal basis before this was in the 80s.
Well, I only started measuring it actually when I took the trip. So I didn't know that there was actually any issue. So clearly I was pretty stressed. And it was a pretty high intensity lifestyle. So so heart rate just rocketed down. I started wearing one of those fitness rings, and the heart rate just dropped off a cliff. And then, as I was starting to plan further out in my trip, and a couple friends said, hey, we'd love to come and join you for your leg in Peru, and wouldn't it be great to do one of these ayahuasca retreats? And at that point, it kind of triggered a memory. 10 years prior, a friend of mine had gone on one of these retreats, and she'd grown up with a pretty challenging childhood, kind of a bit down and out in many ways, and came back from a retreat really transformed. And so that really stuck with me. And at the time, it registered in the back of my consciousness as like, hey, this doesn't seem to align with the way that you currently look at substances. So maybe there is something here that you don't quite yet appreciate and understand. And so when friends raised the subject, then I was like, yeah, let's do it. And honestly speaking, it was two of the most challenging and terrifying nights of my life as part of that retreat. I wasn't prepared for it. I now recognize that there was a lot of things that happened there that could have been facilitated and guided and prepared for very differently than I was. And I wasn't really able to integrate the experience, but it did kick open or blow the door off the hinges to spirituality for me, which I am forever grateful. So I had a lot of insights, a lot of downloads, and it was a very challenging, even terrifying experience. But it has, it fundamentally set me on a different path in life, which is, something that I will be forever grateful for.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. You talk about kind of the lack of preparation, which is something, and we'll get into this in a little bit, that, in your retreats, the ones that you have developed across the globe, pretty much, there is a prep period. So, like, your personal experience, do you mind sharing like what that was like for you, and why the lack of preparation maybe did not give you, the benefits maybe you would have hoped for? But, and how can really understanding what you're walking into and the science behind plant medicine can help you really prepare? Because like you said, I mean, you say ayahuasca, people balk a little bit, just like, whoa, that's a little scary. Or, psilocybins or any of these mushrooms, plants, etc., that you have kind of this preconceived, oh my God, that's bad, that's scary notion towards. How can you change your mindset towards that?
Yeah. And I think the right place to start in relation to this is that you shouldn't necessarily change your mindset in relation to that. So I just before you and I spoke, actually, I was speaking with a client, Dutch guy, successful CFO, taking a mid-career break, 46 years old. Similar sort of situation to what I was describing in terms of there's got to be more to life. I'm still single. What is it that sits behind that? These sorts of questions. And there's a couple dynamics that I think are important. Through in that conversation, he was like, "Yep, I'm ready to go." But in practice, he actually wasn't ready to go. He didn't understand the different medicines that we offer. He didn't understand the challenging experiences that can arise through these experiences. And so, in that phone call, I said to him, "Look, love to serve you and love to, be of service to your, spiritual exploration." But you need more information in order for me to be able to conscientiously sell you what it is that you'd like to buy from us.
So there are people that are ready to really jump in, to really don't know what they're jumping into. So there's got to be like this education part of it, a component of understanding what's about to happen and what these medicines are all about.
Exactly. And, in our organization clearly is one with, commercial interest in people doing this work. And there are many more organizations and increasingly there's a lot of corporate energy moving into this space very quickly. And so what is one of the risks that I see is that there is an elevation of the positive messages and a little bit of a suppression happening perhaps of some of the more challenging experiences that can arise. And so I see that it's very important for, number one, for people to develop their understanding, to take the time and the energy to educate themselves in relation to this body of understanding, this body of knowledge, not to say that experientially, but from an academic understanding. I think that's very important. The second thing that I see is very important is people to develop their own individual why. So, as more media is out there and there's more, stuff in the, in the various channels that we pay attention to, it's very easy to get kind of, oh, well, this is a good thing. I know people who have done it. They said good things. I'm going to go do it.
Yeah.
And actually, I think it's very important that we each, in a very deep and intentional way, develop our own individual why for why is it that you think that this is going to help you? What is it that you've already tried that hasn't worked? And why is it that you're actually taking this path? Because it's not a path for the soft of heart. And so, I really encourage people to really think about it through those lenses. Then, in the last piece that I'll add to this, and you can guide the conversation from here, is that, for most people, we don't even, because we're so, number one, traumatized, and we don't even recognize it. And I can share with you my own story and also, many clients' experiences in relation to that. I thought I was 100% healthy. I would have, flown through any sort of mental health test that was be given by, modern practitioners. I would have done great on that. But I was very traumatized and I didn't even know it. Second to that is what's going on in our minds. We are in the modern age, we are so over-identified with our minds. We actually think of ourselves as our minds. And so, part of this work is about returning the mind to the right place in the hierarchy of self. Now, the mind is an amazing and beautiful tool, but for most of us, I think the National Science Foundation did work recently. Typical person has between 12,000 and 60,000 thoughts per day. Virtually all of those thoughts are I, me, my. So they're egoic thoughts. 95% of those thoughts are repetitive and 85% of those thoughts are negative. So we think a lot only about ourselves, the same things over and over again, and mostly bad things. Yeah. So when you combine those, it's really tragic. And so when most people hear those statistics, they immediately disidentify from them. They say, oh, that's really sad that that's how most people are suffering, not me. And they don't even recognize how subtle the negative and deeply ingrained patterns of mind that have a negative tonality to them. So our own self-parenting mechanisms typically come from a place of judgment and fear and negativity, as opposed to peace and love and joy and these higher states of consciousness that we look to embody through this work.
Which is really interesting because nobody wants to think that we're the ones traumatizing ourselves on a daily basis over and over and over. Kind of this, like you said, the self-talk of all of these thoughts that go through our minds all day long about our own, ourselves. It's just kind of, it's sad to think that that's what we're doing. That was what we're doing to ourselves. So let's talk about, I want to dive into your experience. Why is it that you decided that this is what you wanted to do? I mean, I know you were searching for kind of this spirituality piece, but you admit that you didn't recognize trauma in your life, but that's what you discovered through this experience. Can you talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah. So before I share my own experience, I'll give a very soft example because I think it helps people kind of connect the dots and actually take even a step further back. So typically the most driven people, those who are most driven towards success in the external world, are actually the most traumatized. And that's something that I've come to recognize over the years. And the reason for that is because they've disconnected from their own selves emotionally because of past trauma. And as a result of that, validation needs to come from an external source. And there's no end to that requirement. So those people are just driven, whether it's 5%, 10%, 20%, 50%, 100% harder than the general population. We're all traumatized to a greater or lesser extent, but the people who are the most traumatized are the most driven because they require the most external validation, if that makes sense. And certainly I was one of those people that was pretty deeply traumatized and so very driven to outward success. And equally, I can see that now in virtually all of the mentors that I had, and all amazing A-type individuals, super successful, tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of sales targets against them, right, quarter after quarter, year after year. And they're just performers at a very, very high level. And they're massively traumatized. And so it's been interesting to kind of, I suppose, evolve the nature of the relationship and the conversations that I've had with people who have mentored me throughout the years, which I'm super grateful for, towards helping them recognize and unpack some of these more, deeply held issues. Now, the example that I like to give, and again, I'll keep it very brief, is imagine if you're 5 years old and you're carrying some groceries in for your mom. And mom's had a long day, a bad day. And in that moment, you drop some groceries, something breaks out on the floor. Now, in that moment, mom, not thinking, says, "Oh, you never get anything right. Just get out of the way." Yeah. Very easy, very easy for something like that to take place. Mom had a bad day. And in that moment, that can actually register in the subconscious. And so now the child has registered that in the subconscious. And the next day, he or she is playing ball at school, receives the ball. And in that moment, the tape plays back. You never get anything right. Just get out of the way. Immediately passes the ball, doesn't do anything with the ball. Now we have a pattern. And this pattern can fundamentally, something as minor a transgression as that can set a child on a fundamentally different developmental pattern. Now think about some of the things that you went through as a kid. Think about some of the things that we all go through as children in terms of, trauma, disagreements between parents, in terms of, perhaps a spanking here and there, whatever it is that could have taken place in our childhood. It is very easy to traumatize children. And so it's very common for a young mind, a young brain, to actually take these traumatic experiences and compartmentalize them away. So actually to kind of shield off that part of the brain, the memory, so that it's actually not accessible through everyday normal waking consciousness. Now, one of the powers of these medicines, and there are many, is that it's neurogenerative. And so it dampens down the default mode network of the brain, which is understood to be a network which is in large part responsible for the compartmentalization, which then allows basically full access to these parts of the mind that have been compartmentalized away. And so when I come to my own experience, one of the things that was happening, I now understand that one of the things that was happening to me on the first retreat, which is what made it so challenging, is that my brain was reconnecting with some early childhood trauma. And the trauma was so massive and so painful that basically my whole brain and body was turning off each time I was trying to reaccess that memory. So I was passing out over and over and over again. Wow. And I wasn't facilitated and guided in such a way that people were ready for this. And so they didn't really know. Again, I went to one of the best centers that were out there at the time. There's more than 10 times more centers now than when I started on my own journey. But they fundamentally weren't really aware of how to help guide someone through integrating such a painful and powerful experience. There's just a lot of energy moving around in the mind, body, heart, and spirit. And so, I was just basically hitting the off switch, coming back on, kind of a bit lost, didn't know who I was, where I was. And then the same experience was basically repeating itself over and over again. So it was pretty terrifying. Again, if I'd had more of the preparation, more of the right tools, the right expert facilitation and guidance, I think it would have been a little bit easier than that. And I would have been able to integrate a little bit more of the experience as well.
So this is basically kind of turning off the security system to this big vault of trauma that you've been hiding away. And if you're not prepared, right, to open that door and to receive, this past trauma, all these feelings and emotions and memories, etc., then right. I mean, we kind of have this our own built-in security system of, I'm not doing this. I'm not going to look at this. So I'm out, and kind of just check out. Was any part of that experience, I know that was kind of the scary part and it didn't really work the way that maybe it should have because you weren't prepared. But you said that, the part that you did take away from it was this spirituality piece. Can you connect those dots a little bit? Because again, if you are reading about these retreats and you're reading about the use of this plant medicine, there is such that spiritual component, and people usually go into these looking for that. That is the piece.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so I guess, absolutely, spirituality is at the core of this, and people are looking for these experiences for healing,
Mhm.
for growth, for creativity, for elevating consciousness. So, connecting with purpose. Often one of the things that I often speak about with my mentors is the question I ask them is, what's the one thing that if you had it would make you truly happy, truly fulfilled?
Yeah.
And you see the eyes roll back because, and I think that's why, I reached out to you, is purpose, right? They actually don't know why they're here. And so they don't know what is that thing that would make them happy. They don't know what that thing is that would make them fulfilled. And so they feel very surprised when they don't actually know the answer to this question, because these are smart people who are used to asking very smart questions to a lot of very smart people. And they can't answer this most fundamental and simple question for themselves. And the reason for that is that it's stored in a higher place. And so as we heal some of this lower level stuff and resolve the trauma, the shame, the guilt, the fear, the grief, the apathy, the anger, the envy, the pride, all of these lower level emotions, and release them out, then we can connect up to our higher selves. And these and stored in the soul, for lack of a better term, is a lot of exciting information about self, and all of that stuff is stored up there once we move past that.
So
So for
basically, it's
myself,
just kind of creating space in your being to tap into those things that you've kind of dampened down with all this other stuff. So the
absolutely.
idea of somebody, and this is something that I explore, or I try to explore on this show, the idea of purpose. What happens then if you discover your purpose? Then what? I mean, is the excitement of exploring life then kind of dampened? You know what I mean? Like, is that making sense? Because, once we discover it, okay, there it is. Now what?
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, I think I want to tie this back to the question that you asked
Yeah.
before as well, which is like, I think in Buddhist practice, they have what is described as the middle way. And I think for all things in life, it's a very powerful lens through which to look at things, right? So are you going to go move to a cave in the mountains and dedicate 2 decades to meditation practice? Well, does that sound like the middle way? Maybe not. Are you going to work, 16 hours a day in a fluorescently lit building in a high rise in Hong Kong? Doesn't quite sound like the middle way either, right? Diet, all of these things. So I think all things can be looked at through the lens of the middle way, and to try to find, balance and awareness and equanimity across all the various, aspects and complexities and beauty of life. So that's very much how we encourage our clients to look at it in any case. And then connecting, back to the spirituality and opening that door for me on that first retreat. After that very traumatizing, dare I say it, first evening, in the morning session the following day, I was like, I was describing all of what happened, and I was thinking, I'm not going to do this again. That was just on a whole nother dimension in terms of, and they were like, oh no, that's normal. Let's go again this evening. And I was just like, oh, okay, if you say so, let's go. Wow. So the second evening, I'm pleased to say that the shaman did pay a little bit closer attention to me, and so I had a little bit more insights and guidance, and had some really beautiful experiences. Number one, I was shown, typically speaking, these experiences relate to, I think, two or three primary traits, right? Empathy or love is interchangeable, and courage, right? So I think these are really, what we all look to foster within ourselves, is more love for ourselves, and more courage to do the things in life that we know are going to bring us more peace, love, and joy. Right. And so for me, I had some beautiful experiences. Number one, I was very much shown that I was the only thing between me and my own success, which was a very, at the same time, is the most humbling and also empowering experience that I could ever imagine. And at the time, I remember, I think I was going through a promotion cycle or something before I left, and I was like, well, no, there are these other people who, are influencing my promotability and blah blah blah. And the message just came back like 10 times as strong. It's like, no, it's only you that stands between you and your success. And it was like, wow, that to feel that in every cell of your body is a very different experience than kind of trying to stick that academic knowledge into your brain and having it stick. So that was one. The second was really around showing me how in the corporate world my being was being turned into a product. So it actually showed me a manufacturing line and how myself was being turned into a product, and then zoomed out and showed me how it was like the product was on the manufacturing line, and then how the profit was coming out. But that wasn't for me, that was for the other people. And so I was like, all right, got it. So there's clearly something for me post corporate world. And then the third, which was really beautiful, and I wrote an incredibly long letter to my parents on the back of this. I was shown the most powerful emotions that on my parents' faces. So pride, joy, shame. So I was shown, and then I was shown from a third person perspective how I had caused each of those individual emotions in my parents over the course of my life. So it really took me through from about age 3 or 4 all the way up until current time, and showed me the impact that I was having on them, both really good as well as perhaps not so good. And so again, super humbling experience in terms of becoming, for me, was to become more aware of the good that I can do, but also the ways in which I might like to adjust some of my behavior so that I can have more of the good impact in life.
Sure. See more of those joyful faces. So what is that? Is it, would you describe it as kind of an interpretive experiences? You discuss kind of these images in the conveyor belt line. How much of that is interpretive of you taking that image and really applying it to what's happening in your life and really breaking that down?
Yeah. So just so I answer this semi-sensibly. So are you asking, ask that a different way, maybe?
So, you see these images of the conveyor belt and you apply them to what's happening to your life. It's not a clear message. It's not a clear, this is how you need to interpret this picture here. Do you have, like, coming out of these experiences, when you're going through everything you experienced and saw, how much of it is you taking those and applying or creating like the idea of what this could mean?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Or do you have somebody that helps you with this? I mean, what's the debrief like? You come out of this and you debrief. How does that work?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I've actually never been asked this question. It's so important. Yeah. And so what becomes obvious, I think, through having own experiences plus having guided so many clients over the years, is that these are subjective experiences. Right. And right. We are all experiencing life, and indeed these experiences, through a subjective lens. And I think if ever there was a time in history where that was more clear, I think it's now, where it's very clear that people are seeing the world and all things within it in a very,
very differently. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so your truth is not my truth, is not someone else's truth. And so to be able to recognize that and ultimately honor that, I think is such an important part of this work. And so, yes, absolutely. We provide guidance to our clients in terms of helping them make sense of some of the vision, some of the insights, some of the guidance that they have received. And in some cases, it can be very crystal clear, as I shared before, when you've got like the message of like only you are standing in your own way, and you feel that in every cell of your body. But then there are others that perhaps require some further interpretation. For example, we had a client that was seeing jellyfish for like an hour and a half, giant jellyfish. And, on the surface of that, you go, okay, what's the significance? But one of our coaches, she's very well connected into a lot of people who do a lot of channeling types of work. And she checked with someone, what is the significance of the jellyfish? And it's lost upon me on the moment, but it had such a very specific meaning. And so in her next call with him, she went into this, and they released something that was so massive relating to some of his childhood trauma as a result of her interpreting his jellyfish for him.
So there in that moment when she said, okay, this is the significance of the jellyfish, and it connected immediately with him, and he was able to kind of go through that process of, what he was being shown and understand where to go from there.
Correct. And it was 2 weeks after his retreat. So in the week, 1 week post retreat, he shared that. And then the second week, she had actually gone and done some interpretive work for him to make sense of it, because it was such a dominant theme that he wasn't able to really unpack in the experience itself. So and so I share that because I think those are the two ends of the spectrum, and then maybe there's a third dimension, which is the one that I introduced, which is when you're just so overwhelmed that you have no idea what's going on. And
you just cut out. I'm out.
Yeah, you just cut out. and so yeah, it's but I think what you were alluding to is so important, and this is getting more and more focus, and I'm pleased to see it these days, which is it's really ultimately about the integration. It's about the changes that you make to everyday life to improve the quality of everyday life that ultimately count. It's not that psychedelics or plant medicine in of themselves are positive. They're just a very powerful tool, and if you use them with the right intentionality, the right guidance, the right facilitation, then beautiful and amazing things can happen.
I mean, as with any form of medicine, I feel like, I'm really hopeful that medicine in general, whether it's plant medicine, functional medicine, natural medicine, etc., traditional medicine, heads towards the direction of more individualized medicine, because we're all so very, very, very different. And like you said, even with kind of these plant medicine experiences, you can't put it in a box and say, this is the experience you're going to have with each person. It's going to be very individualized, and kind of what happens after is going to be very individualized. So let's talk about the retreats just a little bit. Because you have several different, or a couple different options, more of a short retreat, and then also kind of this very intensive 7-week healing period. What is a typical client? I know you work with a lot of corporate clients, but is there room for PTSD? Is there room for all of these very, very deep traumatic wounds for this kind of medicine and these kind of retreats to serve?
Yeah, so I'll start by contextualizing that by saying I see that there's a growing body of evidence that is actually pointing to the fact that virtually all disease has a basis in trauma. And
100%.
so,
yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and so that's it's been really interesting to see the breadth of application for plant medicine and psychedelics. So at the moment, what I see is that there's a predominant orientation towards what I would describe as the lower levels of consciousness, right? So that's when we talk about depression, anxiety, PTSD, OCD, addictive disorders. All of these sorts of things reflect people who are suffering. Right. And of course, we want people who are suffering to heal and to be doing better and to be able to, engage in life and be healthy and vibrant and enjoy life with family and work and all of those sorts of things. But what I think is actually being overlooked in that narrative is that there is, we've set the bar for mental health at a subjective level. And as I shared before, I would have jumped through any sort of mental health assessment with flying colors, but I was not well. There was actually so much healing to do. And that process is actually, some people have a little bit of a heebie-jeebies from the word healing because it sounds a bit new agey, right? There's no end to the potential for the elevation of consciousness. And so when we've learned about from virtually every tradition and religion over millennia, about what's possible in terms of spirituality and reaching higher states of consciousness. This is a powerful tool, not just to help people who are suffering reach an acceptable level of consciousness, but to people who are doing already very well or quite well to be doing even way better. And so I think it's such an exciting tool for us as we seek to understand ourselves, as we seek to be better individually and collectively as a whole, and try to harmonize globally, to help us move our motivation out of the egoic and fear-based thinking, where I don't have enough, I'm not going to have enough, and then how do I leverage myself to buy as many investment properties to maybe send my child to university one day. And it's like, wow, like this
for possibly a year. I can only afford a year at this point.
Yeah, and it's getting it's getting to that point where I think it's becoming increasingly clear that it's something that needs to shift, and everyone's pointing at the system saying the system needs to shift, but the system is only a reflection of all of our fear-based activities on the day-by-day basis and how we spend our time and our money. And so I think this is an exciting tool to help people recognize that, like, look, we are collectively abundant. The diseases that we have today are diseases of abundance. They're not diseases of scarcity. And so now can we start to do, collectively agree that we need to do the inner work, not necessarily with psychedelics, but breath work, yoga, meditation, contemplative practices, all of these amazing tools that are out there, coaching, therapy, all of these tools that are out there to begin to help us harmonize within. And then we can begin to harmonize in the outside world once we've been successful in attempting to harmonize what's going on in the inside world.
I mean, I could not agree with you more on that sentiment of, this explosion in chronic diseases that we've seen over the last few decades, and even beyond. I mean, it's kind of been this slow elevation of just autoimmunity, and I mean, just all of the cancer and all of these horrible diseases. And I cannot help but wonder, and really, like you said, connect that to our lack of spirituality, our lack of being connected to one another, to ourselves, to the planet, to etc., and really kind of focusing on that. And so the idea that, like you said, we set this bar here for mental health, but we're not going to push it even further beyond, obviously something's not working. So many like yourself reach out for these other healing practices. What are some of, and I guess especially maybe in your retreats, what are some of the stories that have touched you the most of somebody spending time at one of your retreats or one of your programs, even like the 7-week one? What are some stories coming out? How are people responding? How has it changed their lives?
Yeah, sure. There's 3 stories that immediately come to mind. The first 2 are very brief, and then the third, which is very heartwarming, and so I love to share it. The first was a gentleman who, super successful tech executive, running 4 companies, and the message he sent me when he got back was, "I've cleared 50 years worth of shit in 10 days. This has been more amazing."
Wouldn't we all love that?
And he said, this has been more amazing than I ever could have possibly imagined. I came to play and went in deep. And so it's burned itself into my mind. So that was one. The second was a gentleman actually more recently that went on a retreat. And he said, this is the first time that I've enjoyed being myself in quite some years. Thank you so much. Wow. And it was like, yeah, it's just amazing, right? To think that he wasn't enjoying he wasn't enjoying being himself. And it's like, wow, like that's harsh. And then on the lighter side of life, another tech executive, there's a couple of them out there. And from one of the biggest known technology platforms, I won't say the name, but he came on one of our retreats, and immediately after the retreat, he called me and goes, okay, he was talking about like consciousness in the universe. He goes, okay, what is this? How does it all work? And so it's,
he tapped into some answers right there.
yeah. And so he was very hungry. He was on a bit of a career break, kind of 2-month break in shifting to another global role. And And so he was like having some time on his hands to like dive deep into the topic of consciousness. So we talked for about 2 hours, and I was just recommending a lot of resources and other things he might plug into to continue the practice. Because, you know, the way I look at these experiences is it can shine a light very far. You know, these experiences can shine a light very far down a path for us, and then it's our work to actually, you know, as we come back into our 3D form, to actually begin to make the baby steps in that direction. Because it's not that we need to rely on these medicines to achieve these states of being, it's that the medicine can show us what's possible without any shadow of a doubt. And so then we can begin to do the work in the 3D to bring it back and to make it real on the daily basis, as opposed to something that happened on retreat.
Do you find that that's what's the most difficult for people coming out of these retreats, is actually doing the work after, once you've kind of been shown, all right, this is what's possible for me, these are the walls that I've broken down, now what? And what kind of guidance do your staff and those affiliated with the retreats, is there kind of like after work?
Yeah, you know, and it's not a one size fits all for this. I really, going into retreats, I really encourage clients, like, you're going to think that you got it all. Don't give yourself the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
because 3 weeks after the retreat, you're going to be going, God, what was it again? I think I need to go on another retreat. And this is the cycle that I was on for years, because I wasn't doing the mental and emotional work. And it's so easy to just lose that feeling. And then feel like you need to get on another retreat. And fundamentally, that's not it. The mental and emotional work is so fundamental to actually sustaining the benefits from this work. So, you know, if you go into these retreats and you don't actually know what patterns of mind you're trying to rewire, so, you know, specifically, what neural pathways are you currently firing over and over again that are leading to your current state of mind, because there is another and probably better neural pathway that you could be using. So if you actually identify that with your therapist and your coach, then when you regain your neuroplasticity, you can actually begin to, dare I say, over-exercise that new neural pathway, so that there's a much stronger chance of that becoming the default neural pathway. The next time that someone cuts you off in traffic, you're not going to scream and yell and honk your horn. You're going to go, peace, love, and light, maybe, for example, right? And send him good thoughts and carry on with your day. And so if you don't actually know what those are, then what tends to happen is that, you know, 3 weeks down the line, as the medicine is wearing off, then the old patterns, those old grooves, are just going to come back to the fore. There's actually some really great science that has shown these medicines are great for, number one, connecting with our joy for life. Number two, deepening our spirituality. And number three, most importantly, they do not remove feelings of negativity and toxicity. So you'll meet people who've done medicine work and it's become part of identity and ego. Oh, I've done 150 ceremonies over 20 years. And you look at their lives and it's just chaos. It's absolute pandemonium. You know,
it didn't work for you.
No, it's fear, it's negativity, judgment, scarcity. The relationships are a disaster. You know, they got piles of crap all over their house, excuse my French. And you're like going, what is going on in your mind? And so it's not that these medicines in of themselves fix anything. You have to do that work to release the negativity and to actually observe what's going on in the mind.
Fantastic. I mean, and I imagine going into that, or coming out of it, I guess, would be a little bit terrifying. You know, okay, I've seen the light, and now there's a lot of work to do. And I'm sure, you know, depending on the situation and depending on what kind of came up, there might be more work for some than others. Do you find that this transforms people's lives more often than not?
Yes, absolutely. And I think to link that back to something that you just said, which is a super important word that I haven't used, which is light, or I did use it maybe once, but not in the context that I'm going to now. So, you know, consciousness exists in polarity. So clearly we want to be climbing up into these, you know, transcendent experiences of interconnectivity of all things and universal love and God consciousness and moving towards the light. But consciousness exists in polarity. And so as our range is expanded, it's expanded along both poles. And so we can go down into some very deep, dark places, places that are, you know, our own deep, dark corners, and also collective deep dark corners. And so, it's equally possible to go down into these experiences and to have very challenging experiences down in these lower levels of consciousness. And so I'm glad you raised that, because healing experiences come through not just reaching these higher states, but also releasing what's happening at the lower levels. So I always encourage clients, shadow work has become very popular these days, which is when you're looking into the shadows and you're trying to, find more dark stuff. And if you endlessly are looking for more dark stuff, then you're probably going to find more dark stuff. So in contrast, I try to encourage clients, let's move towards the light, the stuff that needs to come out of the darkness in order to enable you to move further into the light. Probably will, and it is dark stuff when it comes up. And so the coaching, and that's really when the coaching and the guidance really is comes into its own, because if you experience the interconnectivity of all things, like you're like, wow, that was amazing and beautiful, and like all things in the universe are interconnected, and isn't that amazing? And your coaching and therapist is probably gonna be like, yes, it is. Whereas in contrast, if you've just gone down into the collective sickness and witness and experience some of the things that are happening down there, you're going to want probably a little bit more conversation and support and guidance in relation to the nature of that experience, and how to release some of the lower level things and feelings that you might be having about that, but also to integrate that so that you can make sure that it's not a burden that you're carrying with you, post that experience.
Sure, you certainly don't want to make things more difficult post experience. I mean, although, like you said, there will be some kind of difficult times with things you have to really deal with. But let's talk a little bit about the safety factor. I mean, these are medicinals. What's the science behind using these and the safety of these for experiences like this, and for healing practices and healing purposes?
Yeah, so we're lucky now to have quite a few decades of science behind us. There was, in the 50s and 60s, there was a first surge, and then that was put to a pause for reasons we don't need to go into today. And now we're about 2 decades into another round of science. So we've got some really compelling evidence for the benefits, right? Yeah. To mind, body. There's epigenetic benefits have just been proven for the first time in a couple of months ago. So I think that's just the beginning of what is a very exciting field,
that's really interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So for me personally, that's my primary focus, because I've cleared a lot of the lower level stuff. There's always more, but now it's really about genetic activation. So a lot of the mentorship, spiritual guidance that I receive is really about how to activate more DNA. And so, that's just the first scientific paper that has shown proven epigenetic benefits to plant medicine experiences. So again, that's the genetic expression of our genes. So I think we have, from memory, it's 146,000 genes or something like that. Only 23,000 or so are expressing at a point in time. And so optimizing that genetic expression is very powerful in terms of being at our physical, mental, emotional, and energetic best.
So I would like to read those. So I'm going to ask you after we hang up here. I would really love to read that science. That's fascinating. I don't think I realized that was kind of the direction that some of these were going, because, before we keep going, these are not medicines that are, or most of them are not, you're not allowed to use in the States. Where you're in Thailand, but here it's not something that we are hearing and being able to use a lot here. So where is this headed as far as legality goes? I mean, if all this science is coming out and it's showing that there are these benefits, the red tape, how can we what's happening there?
So it's really interesting because so there's a lot happening there, which is the first thing to say, and it's very beautiful to see. There are there's a few different lines of thinking, certainly within this world. The medical model that we currently have in place is one that's very much based upon control, right?
Sure.
And so, there's there's certainly forces at work that are seeking to medicalize this work.
Right.
And there's pros and cons to that. I think, it's no regrets to make the compromises necessary in order to get these medicines and treatment modalities into the current system, even if the current system isn't exactly optimal. And I think most of us can agree that.
100%.
The other aspect that I think is in dynamic that's important is that in the way that the clinical trials run and psychedelic science looks at this work, they look at the mental and the emotional aspects before and after the work, but they're not really clued up so much on the energetic aspects of the work.
Yeah.
Whereas the shamans, the people who are doing this work from indigenous traditions, etc., they are not really so clued into the levels of intergenerational trauma that a typical Westerner is bringing into this work. So they're not quite as equipped on the mental and emotional side. Often they don't even speak the same language as some of our clients. So
Right.
there's a gap there. But they are very clued up and knowledgeable on the energetic side, because the way that they do this work is within a culture and a context and a community, which holds the container, if you will, for the mental and emotional integration. Whereas, if someone's flying down from New York, banking job and doing a week retreat and then flying back, then it's not the same sort of container as
Right.
is, ritually and traditionally been the case. So that's much of what we're trying to do, is to actually bring those aspects together to maximize, the benefits and the potential of this work, of kind of the mental and emotional work from coaches and therapists, and then, the facilitation and healing from expert people who can do the energetic aspects of the work. And so, again, in the clinical trials, they don't have energetic practitioners in any of the clinical trials, to the best of my knowledge. And indeed, some of the practices that you hear about that are happening in the clinical trials, they're trying. The thing with the scientific method, the problem with the scientific method, is that it's deterministic, right? So they're trying to design a specific protocol. They're trying to design a specific protocol where if you take, one traumatized person and apply 2 grams of psilocybin after 3 therapy sessions and then 3 more therapy sessions, do you get a healed person? And it's just, you might get some good results some of the time, but it's certainly not as compelling as when you have an energetic practitioner also along for the journey. And so I think we're just we're still scratching the surface in terms of what's possible through this work. I think what comes available through this work is the understanding that the whole universe is just, one big matrix of consciousness. And so anything is possible through mind, through consciousness. I've been very inspired more recently by reading a lot of, ancient tales of people dematerializing. And I think that's entirely possible. People teleporting, telekinetic powers. I've certainly seen that in some of our spiritual mentors, in terms of what some of the things that they can do. I would have described someone as absolutely insane if they told me
You've lost
5
your
years
mind.
ago. Yeah, it's like
Yeah,
you totally lost.
and I think that everyday people looking into that would be terrifying. I mean, that would be a terrifying thought. But again, like, are there concerns around the safety of these, and what are some of the, because there's side effects to any kind of medicine, plant medicine, pharmaceuticals, etc. What are some of the safety concerns around these? I mean, and I know there's a plethora of plant medicinals. What are some of the major concerns?
Yeah, so I'll break it into 3 categories. So the first is psychological. The second is I would say medical, and the third is medications, right? So in terms of psychological, the things that are most strongly contraindicated are, number 1, psychosis, number 2, schizophrenia, number 3, bipolar. So any sort of like major psychological disorders such as that really needs to be treated carefully. In fact, with bipolar, we do see some of the biggest breakthroughs. And so there are clinical trials ongoing specifically for bipolar. And so, if you were to speak to very advanced healers, they would tell you that all of those things can be cured through plant medicine. However, the skills that are required and the container that's required in order to treat those sorts of mental disorders are very intensive. And so, for example, we don't accept clients with that. Equally, people who are suicidal, levels of depression and that sort of thing, I mean, this can seriously destabilize them in a way. And so again, yes, great results can be had, but again, you need to be super conscious, super selective in terms of what container that they are opting into to do this work. And then, the second is medical or physical, right? So we bring all of our clients through a pretty in-depth medical screening. And so, it's things like, you need to make sure that your heart is good. You need to make sure that there's no, physical contraindication. So that's important as well. It depends a little bit in terms of the medicine, unfortunately. And then the third category is, unfortunately, a lot of people are on prescription medications these days, and virtually all of these medicines are contraindicated with prescription medications. They just don't play nice with these unnatural substances.
It kind of sounds like that makes complete sense, where you have two different worlds of medicine right here, kind of this more synthetic and then the more natural. They don't typically want to go together.
No, they do not play nice. So look, I think, all said and done, when the right expertise and precaution is put into the screening process, the facilitation, the guidance, the preparation, then, these experiences are safe. They can be very challenging, even traumatizing, as I shared. But these experiences are safe. The thing that I always encourage people to do is to make sure that they are going through a very high quality medical screening, because a lot of the businesses that are out there are relatively small, and so they often don't keep up to date with all of the latest contraindications, and so that can become a problem as well. We've just put a bunch of time and energy into a latest a latest review of some of our medical protocols, and we're thinking of actually just sending it out to all the other centers to just say, hey, here's, we've put a whole bunch of time and energy into this. Maybe you could just use this in terms of checking any clients against it, because harm reduction is a real concern. There's a lot of people who honestly cannot afford the types of experiences that we provide, or traveling to Costa Rica. There's people who provide cheaper services than we do. They just can't afford it. And so, they're desperate to be better. And so they're going out and trying to find, whatever psychedelics can be found locally, and then trying to go home and do it themselves. And I'm not saying that healing experiences can't be had that way. It's just that psychedelic harm is a real thing. And so would just very much encourage anyone, all of your listeners, to take utmost care with themselves, because they're totally worth it.
Well, and what's interesting is, just as in like the traditional model with pharmaceuticals, even though there's this massive amount of harm, especially in kind of the painkiller realm, it's still not giving that a bad enough name to rid ourselves of those kind of pharmaceuticals. Whereas natural medicine, plant medicine, already there is this kind of stigma around it as it is. And if you have these experiences where there's all these bad things happening around the safety of it, you're not going to be able to reap the benefits of what it can really bring to somebody. So the fact that, you put so much time and energy into the safety around it and really vetting people, I think is super important. And hopefully, other retreats worldwide will do the same, so that these things can become more mainstream and available to people, especially, here in the States, and for all kinds of different purposes. So just to wrap up, where can people find all the information about your retreats, your programs, everything that you guys have to offer?
Yeah, so we're Behold Retreats. You can find us at behold-retreats.com or at behold_retreats. on Instagram, and we're on other social media platforms as well. But that'll suffice for now. And yeah, if for any of those that are listening that would like to explore a journey, then come and check us out. As I shared, we do retreats in Costa Rica and Mexico, Portugal, Netherlands, and knock on wood, I'm hoping to establish a first legal option in Asia in the next 12 or 18 months. So that's been a big focus for me.
Fantastic. Well, my 40th birthday is next year, so maybe maybe we'll make a retreat of it.
Well,
it sounds absolutely amazing, and I appreciate the work that you're doing, and I appreciate this conversation and kind of bringing it out to everybody. There's so many questions around it, and I think we've had a beautiful conversation. So thank you so very much.
Thank you, Brandy. Really appreciate it.